To quote a great visionary from the last century, the spiritual journey does not consist in arriving at a new destination, where a person gains what he did not have, or becomes what he is not. It consists in the dissipation of one's own ignorance, concerning oneself and life, and the gradual growth of that understanding, which begins the spiritual awakening. The finding of God is a coming to oneself. Aldous Huxley. Winding the clock forward to the 21st century, I, as well as thousands of others awakening in recent years, have become indubitably aware of today's reality both on a global and personal basis. A fascinating journey from which there is no return, empowers a growing up process to comprehend as conscious beings that what one seeks externally in life, is, and has always been, within us all, simply awaiting discovery. Differentiating awareness and consciousness and their alchemic derivative in quotidian life plays a pivotal role in this unfoldment. Awareness is at its core intellectual understanding. Although closely related to knowledge, it's more evolved. Having knowledge does not guarantee awareness, whilst awareness does require knowledge, as well as an all-important dose of personal experience. Greater awareness requires open-minded skepticism, that is to say, having the ability to take on new information whilst remaining skeptical to its content. In your own self-development, skepticism should be a well-sharpened instrument in your toolbox. Being told by some so and so that it is so, does not necessarily mean it is. Only personal experience can help us come to such conclusions. Converting either yours or someone else's beliefs into truth is a fundamental process in personal growth. When you have arrived to a truth, staying open-minded to new data, whether experiential or theoretical, remains important. The trick here is to be sufficiently open-minded as to allow data in, whilst avoiding your brain falling out. Another ingredient for awareness is intuition. The dictionary definition of intuition is the ability to understand something instinctively without the need for conscious reasoning. Could this be misleading? Could it be more aptly defined as the ability to understand something instinctively without the need for intellectual reasoning? There are some persons with greater intuition than others with no logical reason as to why. A more esoterical explanation is that such persons have more evolved souls as a result of repeated incarnations. Others might say it's in the genes, or simply that some of us got a bigger dollop than others somewhere down the line. For this exercise it doesn't really matter, as my theory simply requires intuition to be nurtured through greater awareness and higher consciousness. Hold on, I hear some say, that's a flawed statement. If awareness requires intuition in the first place, how can it then feed it? Well, like the proverbial chicken and the egg conundrum, they evolved together. In resume, we cannot be aware of what is beyond our awareness. We can, however, increase our awareness by being open to learning new things, which as a consequence will help us better understand the nature of our reality. The polar opposite to awareness is obviously ignorance. Ignorance is like an odorless gas and to be avoided like a broken gas heater. The problem with ignorance is that you don't know what you don't know, therefore the metaphoric carbon monoxide might literally take away your livelihood, or worse, whilst you sleep snugly in an ignorant fog of bliss. So, how do we avoid this? Getting off the sofa and searching out new experiences is a good start, followed by watching out for what goes into our stomachs, respecting our health generally, going the extra mile, living and loving life and everyone in it to the full, persistently looking to increase knowledge whilst washing it all down with lashings of open-minded skepticism. So why is greater awareness so important in the 21st century? There are those that might say the world is so irreversibly screwed up that ignorance is indeed bliss. Although that might have a certain sweet twang on a bad day, I'd suggest such folk, as well as New Age positive thinkers, install the gas sensors, as their lives are possibly going to change for the worse, and the change may come while they slumber. Before having too many of my own experiences, intuition told me as a young tireway that people in positions of authority and or power did not necessarily give them automatic entrance into the realm of being right, or indeed have my best interests at heart. Those around me not sharing such a theorem, family, teachers, and the law, etc., initially decided I was disruptive and eventually just damn right anti-establishment. As a result, one could say I had an eventful albeit very happy childhood. So as I waited through my early years, did this immature childish Guerrero convert into a mature thought-provoking adult? Damn right he did, simply confirming what my intuition told me at 8. The most important thing to be aware of in 2015, apart from the global fiat, usury, fractional Ponzi financial system, is that those nice people elected and chosen to public office do not necessarily have at heart the best intentions or interests of the man in the street. That is to say, you and me, and will lie and deceive, and often worse, to achieve their, or the real makers and shakers, objectives. The problem is that even if they did want to do things right, they simply can't. The current system, controlled by an all-powerful establishment corrupted and often vile at its pinnacle, simply doesn't give them that room. The dice being definitely loaded in favor of the big money boys, namely financial institutions and multinational corporations whose rigged capitalistic model imparts dividends of unlimited power and influence. It has become abundantly clear that those with the real political clout, whoever they really are, have deduced that the constitutions upon which our centuries-old democracies are founded, simply don't work in a future they excogitate. The most basic principles are simply ignored or circumvented via decrees and executive orders, using a unifying the people theme, or national security fear card, to trump all dissent or transparency. So does this mean all elected, and unelected come to that, public servants are icky souls? No, most of them are normal folk who either live in a conditioned denial, consciously choose ignorance as a way of life, have not yet awoken, are close to retirement, or discover after idealistic beginnings, that the whole system they bought into is heavily tipped in favor of a manipulating few, that simply cannot lose. Their victory being consummated by betting on all political runners whilst conjuring up an illusion of choice to the unenlightened voter. Upon the realization of this truth, our public servants can either acquiesce, that is carrying on playing the game albeit now consciously, or look to jump ship. The problem here is that these mere souls, after years of toil dragging themselves through the ranks, suffering 25-hour days with streams of sweat and no lack of tears, have acquired all the material benefits that go with the terrain, and just in case they had thought of getting out, their lives are probably leveraged to the hilts with lashings of debt. With a prospect like that, the water below becomes titanically cold. Then, there are the career politicians. We'll leave out the bankers and multinational cooperate CEOs for the moment, whose decisions are often focalized around personal ego and financial gain, within a political corporate revolving door mise en scene. Devoid of transparency, their motivations and actions speak louder about their quality of being than any pre-rehearsed ad hoc sincerity freshly perched by their spin masters. I haven't worked out yet if these folk are born with psychopathic tendencies or they simply germinate once in position. I don't mean they necessarily revel in having people illuminated, though with some you have to wonder. I refer to their greatest angst, the fear of being caught in whatever they, or their henchmen are perfidiously implementing. Anyone with this psychopathic symptom has one common flaw: they lie and lie, and if necessary, lie a bit more. Ring any bells, Tony? Very occasionally even one of these high flyers contemplate a noisy jumping of ship, automatically triggering into action their very own secret agencies. Agencies busy setting up honey traps and spreading lies, particularly on the internet, about whichever individuals they seem fit to target, including you and me if we step over their line. Swearing allegiance to their own 4D agenda: deny, disrupt, degrade, and deceive. Any high-flying dissenter may want to reassess their conscience before going AWOL. I get the feeling that the 21st century establishment, with their hierarchical structures, consequent paradigms, and spawning tentacles that know no borders, encourage a certain type of person into positions of high power, whilst the lower echelons of elected and unelected public servants subsequently fall into a type of institutionalized subordination to be preserved at all costs as to avoid the icy Atlantic or worse. Within this political backdrop, we are experiencing a loss of liberty and consequent privacy. Along with an ever-increasing social divide, degeneration of public services, deterioration of mental and general health, Frankenstein food production, record debt, along with the destruction of the world's resources. Corporations, bankers, and their lobbyists have gained control of our public servants and global organizations, ensuring laws, wars, and global migration are based on their own engrossment and not the greater good of the electorate or their habitat. Lastly, but not leastly, let's not forget our mainstream media outlets owned by delightfully charming gentlemen such as Rupert Murdoch or pioneers like Disney's ABC News Network, regurgitating a narrative 24/7, so twisted and distorted, that the truth has become a simple inconvenience camouflaged within a melee of information and misinformation, leaving even the most enlightened confused. Sadly, our minds have been hijacked by this perception deception. In fact, we're loving it, believing politicians' bullshit, multinational propaganda, media pantomime, and worshipping celebrity meritocracy. After all, Mickey Mouse wouldn't screw us, would he? Being aware of this illusory reality is fundamental for our long-term well-being. Hopefully your own experiential journey of awakening will be fast and not too vexatious, as once you see through this illusion, and care, you start becoming the solution. Okay, so there are many negative facets responsible for the problems we face. By ascribing problems to this, that, and the other, that is to say third parties, we are on a hiding to nothing, albeit it does serve as a great softener on a bad day. Change starts with ourselves, our habits, and our own ability to respond, i.e. responsibility. After all, what we see in the world is a reflection of our collective selves. The past century has seen a shift from us requiring our basic needs, which are now taken for granted, to demanding our desires. As a result, we often treat others based on greed and an obsession of ownership, combined with the subsequent fear of foregoing whatever we have fought hard to acquire. This lifestyle shift from need to desire, where consumerism has become a new religion, and debt an acceptable method of funding it, has meant our own unconscious servitude and egotistical demeanor has greatly reduced our ability to respond and create change. Bellyaching about influential shakers, whether financial or political, leveraging power for their own personal gain, ain't the answer either. Although today's plutocracy, consummated via pseudo-capitalism, is a reality, our conversion to victimism simply devours our power and distorts the mind. I suggest we start looking at our own behavior and cultural habits, and recognize the culture of doing because we can, and not because it's right, has consummated our actions. Our successful growth is about common unity, that is to say working together, educating our children to question everything, sharing with others, caring about our neighbor and doing what's right and not simply what's right for you. This latter selfish egoistic trend, fueled by a slick subliminal media narrative that promotes the all-important self, eventually reflects in the quality of public servants we have been graced to choose from. How can we expect to find the truth if we are in denial ourselves? Of course, the biggest dilemma with denial is exactly that, denial. So, are we being taken on an oblique global journey to shine light on all this? Is this a universal experience requiring group therapy for awakening, resulting ultimately in the collapse of the old and the birth of the new from the metaphorical ashes? It may be. So, what of consciousness, and what does that have to do with a world falling apart? Mainstream science would have us conclude that consciousness is generated by the brain, that is to say no brain no consciousness. Fortunately, this reductionist idiocy is slowly being overturned by more enlightened scientific souls. However, in the meantime, whole industries and educational syllabuses are still established on such fallacy. Ironically, modern-day objective science, born from the scientific renaissance as an alternative to dogmatic 16th-century Catholicism, has since morphed itself into its very own religion, dogma, and all. This is particularly evident from its perspective on Newtonian causality and the presumption that if you can't measure something, that is to say it's not accessible to the five senses, it simply does not exist, or if it does, it has no importance as we can have no interaction with it. This obviously does not mean Newton was wrong, but simply that his science has become a subset to a new reality that mankind has become aware of since his own hard slog over 400 years ago. Even for a scientific dimwit like myself who flunked miserably all science at school, I can categorically say today's dogma is hogwash and can give 3 quick examples as to why. 1. The double-slit experiment, first carried out almost 100 years ago and repeated hundreds of times since, proves beyond doubt, using their own trusted scientific method, that outcome can be determined by observation. That is to say, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. 2. In Terence McKenna's famous words about science, he said, "Give us one free miracle, and we'll explain the rest." The one free miracle being the appearance of all matter and energy in the universe and all the laws that govern it from nothing in that single instant, that is the Big Bang. Thereafter everything else can be explained by cause and effect. 3. And my favorite, despite the requirement for anything to be real, it must first be measurable using the scientific method. This method is used to determine all mainstream scientific theories. In the case of medicine, however, it insists on the placebo effect being taken into account before making any trial valid. How crazy is that? This is the same placebo effect that science itself cannot explain. Industries are created and trillions invested in such scientific hypocritical falsehood. Our forefathers talked of working towards a better future for their children and their children's children. The last 200 years of exponential growth in population, technology, science, economics, food supply, money supply, debt, etc., and the consequent exploitation of our natural resources, ensure that the decisions we make today will literally determine our tomorrow, that is to say, our immediate futures. What is lacking is the all-important exponential shift in human consciousness required to understand how we can thrive in this intriguing new world. Whilst the old school dwell on old truths, new indisputable evidence about our own evolution and the universe has been discovered which mainstream science and historians, that is to say the establishment, refuse to recognize. As a result, we are trying to solve new problems based upon old truths. The massive flaws in 21st century mainstream science means that it cannot yet be counted upon to provide answers to the so far unanswered mysteries of the universe. For the biggest question, that is to say, what is the purpose of the human experience, we simply need to work it out ourselves by going beyond the five senses. My own Gnostic knowing tells me it's a game of understanding. A game we come into with no written rules and whose lessons consist of 99.99% on-the-job training. Often tough, and even inhuman, it should be played with discipline, along with large helpings of laughter and fun. I have come to realize the game is not a race, parade, nor competition, and that it is an experiential journey custom designed by our free will to increase consciousness and evolve spiritual being within a physical matter reality, person by person, generation by generation. We are at a crossroads in this process. A crossroads we had to arrive at. We are in effect exactly where we had to be, both on a macro, that is our nations, and micro, that is ourselves, basis. The Earth is going nowhere. The question is, what will it look like at the end of this century, and will we still be around? After hundreds of generations, our own experiential solutions have never been so important if we are to evolve to a level that does not involve stroking mankind's self-destruct button. To really understand consciousness, you have to feel it, and here comes the crutch of the matter. If awareness uses the intellect, that is to say the brain, consciousness is about feeling it in the heart. Physically a short distance from awareness, but a massive journey in understanding. Understanding this in certain languages has an added difficulty in that the same word is used for awareness as it is for consciousness. Spanish is a good example. So if awareness is an intellectual knowing, an understanding, why when we are aware of negative behavior don't we change it? Now that's a complicated question, ask any addict. The mother of answers to this conundrum is that we have not felt the true depths of the problem in our hearts. Our heart is no doubt our wisest organ. When we act from it, we become the solution and stop being the problem. Being conscious is therefore a knowing, deep from within the heart. This is somewhat ironic, bearing in mind we relate consciousness to the brain. I suggest that consciousness is what connects us all within a unified field, whose signal is received by the soul, and whose message is felt in the heart. Unfortunately, such subjective theories are relegated at best to the realms of spirituality, and whilst science is moving forward, its dogma is pulling the reins back, keeping us firmly entrenched in 20th century paradigms. If this imbroglio does not transcend, and quickly, we have quite a predicament on our hands in the 21st century. So, in resume, it's physically a short trip, brain awareness to heart consciousness, it just seems a bloody long way. In fact, many of us go to the grave without completing this short journey. This needs to change, and change is coming. Holding us back is our obsession with the material as opposed to the comprehension of our spiritual being. So what is the solution to our 21st century problems? Our awakening to all these matters has passed a point of no return. Greater awareness as to who yields power and its consequent effects cannot be suppressed. It's time to embrace streetwise spiritualism to find answers as a species, as opposed to as nations. A quantum leap in mankind's evolution of self-actualization awaits. Many know from their hearts that love does indeed conquer all, and that the true answers we pursue await our discovery in the subjective. However, they also know that traction comes with action and are prepared to expose the cancerous plague that has gained power of our nations with such devastating effects. This army of alchemistic activists is growing, and nothing is going to stop them. A streetwise spiritualist understands mankind's ability to overcome adversity, realizing that to understand the truth they don't have to hammer onto somebody. Their task is to refine their message into an understandable form and then let the dynamics of intellectual competition decide what is the best model to follow. With the status quo of mankind's immature state of consciousness, the advent of genetic engineering, robotics, AI, and the subsequent moment of singularity when non-organic intelligence surpasses organic intelligence, avoiding man's own apparent self-destruction is, I suggest, a process that is moving exponentially towards its tipping point. If we are to improve our ability to thrive, improve sustainably with harmonious compatibility, we must become the change we want to see in the world, changing our own negative habits by first being aware of them and secondly by being truly conscious of their consequences, nation by nation, company by company, heart by heart. Written by Stephen Griffin. Please share if you have enjoyed this article.